This episode of the Smart Community Podcast is brought to you by Arup, an independent firm of designers, planners, engineers, consultants, and technical specialists working across every aspect of today's built environment. In this episode of the Smart Community Podcast, I had a brilliant conversation with Andrew Pettifer, the New South Wales region lead for Arup, and Steve Costa, the managing director at the international design practice Hassel. We have a fascinating discussion about the impacts of technology, design, and leadership on the way that we work and how this fits into the smart city arena. Arup have just opened 3 new buildings for their workforce in Sydney, Melbourne, and Singapore, and we talk about the guiding principles for these buildings and why it's so important that we have this forward-thinking approach rather than just leasing an existing office building. I have visited both the Sydney and Melbourne sites, and I must say the intentional design really does make a difference. It just feels different being there, particularly in Sydney with the big empty space in the middle. It just really opens it up for collaboration, and you can kind of still see everyone even if you're not on the same floor, which until you're there, you can't really make sense of in your head. But anyway, we discuss a lot of these things in the episode. So Andrew and Steve explain the process of planning, designing, and implementing such a smart and sustainable building. As well as talking about the different ways design, space, and technology are used, we also discuss the power of workplace culture and the importance of giving people flexible work choices and the need for leadership to create high-trust environments for staff and leaders. We finish our conversation discussing the emerging trends in the ways that we work and how work will change into the future. If you or your company would like to sponsor an episode of the Smart Community Podcast, please send an email to zoe@mysmart.community and we can discuss the different options. As always, I hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed making it.
Welcome to the Smart Community, Smart Region, Smart Towns, and Smart Cities. It's where we live, work, and play. With smart communities, the future starts today. Big data, smart mobility, emerging trends galore. The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.
Hello, Andrew and Steve. How are you both today?
Very well, thank you.
Very good. Thanks for having us.
Excellent. I'm so excited to learn more about what you are doing. So let's start with, can you tell us about your background and what you're passionate about? So Andrew, if you want to go first.
Yeah, sure. I'm a buildings engineer, a building services engineer. That's what I've been doing through my career. But I guess as it's evolved, I've moved more into a sort of leadership space. And now I lead groups of consultants, work on projects. And I'm passionate about design, but also about leadership and culture, and actually how those things interrelate. So how we can have a really good culture within our organisation as a design company that can create great outcomes for our clients.
Excellent.
And so I'm an architect, trained as an architect, but quickly got involved and passionate about the briefing stage of projects in particular, because it felt to me like that's where a lot of untapped value seemed to sit in the process. So I spent most of my working career helping clients to sort of develop and articulate a better brief in order to then get better design outcomes. And ultimately, we're trying to make better places for businesses and people, places that people love to work in this case.
Excellent. Okay, so how do you think the way that we work fits into the smart cities or the smart community kind of arena?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, with the impact that technology now has had on, the way that we all work. We've seen this kind of merging of our time, if you like, between our personal time and our work time, and technology has enabled us to work anywhere, anytime, any place. And in some ways, that's the risk is that that's the kind of threat, to people's well-being. But I think we need to, as an organisation, at Arup at least, we see that as an opportunity to improve people's lives and what they get out of what they do working for us. So to me, the question is, how do we use technology, workplace, flexible working, and so on to create what our business wants to achieve, but do it in a way that, makes people's lives, enjoyable and, they're passionate about, working for us.
And I think for me, we're sort of particularly interested in how to make places work smarter, not just harder. And whilst there's obviously all sorts of opportunities through technology and other advances that can help us work smarter, there's a real human end to that as well, which we're particularly interested in. So people talk about artificial intelligence and technological intelligence, but we're really interested in places that help also build emotional intelligence into cultures and organizations. And that's really about people and enabling people. So if people are working smarter, then they can then leverage all of those other technological advances as well.
Yeah, I agree entirely with that. And I think, for me, the culture of an organisation, and our organisation at Arup has a very particular culture, which is quite a kind of social one, and that's a key element to this, emotional well-being that you're talking about. We want to create places for our people where they want to come together and actually really enjoy what they're doing and enjoy how they collaborate with people and how they socialise with people and do great work. And that is, that's partly enabled by technology, it's partly by workplace, but fundamentally it's underpinned by culture and behaviour within any one organisation, and that's something that we're very focused on at Arup.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for sharing that, both of you. So can you tell us about the guiding principles of, these new buildings? People might not know what we're talking about, but can you take us through why it was so important to have this new approach, or this forward-thinking approach, rather than just leasing another office building when, say the lease came up or whatever? And there's new buildings we have in Sydney, Melbourne and Singapore. So can you tell us about the guiding principles to start with, and then maybe how, they're the same, the buildings are the same, and then how the buildings are also different as well?
Yeah, sure. So Arup have created 3 new workplaces that have opened in the last few weeks, Sydney, Melbourne, Singapore, all significant offices with hundreds of staff. But that is the culmination of 7 years, I think, of strategizing, planning, looking at what we might do. And that started with an engagement with Hassel that Steve and his team worked on, where we said, regardless of where we're going to be moving and when, let's just think about what is the future of workplace for our organisation. What are the things that are going to change, and what do we need to do to respond to? And what we saw changing obviously was technology, and also the impact that technology was having on the nature and style of working of the people that we saw coming into our business, the digital natives as they call them. People who have grown up in that environment of technology work in a very different way to those of us who used to work on drawing boards and so on. So we really wanted to think about that. And what we ended up doing, or Hassel did with us, talking to our staff and imagining what the future might be like, and putting that into a set of sort of guiding principles. And so what that did, it captured those things that we already felt were very strong about our organisation and our culture and the way we work and passionate about. And then merge that into how was that going to be changing in the future with new ways of working. So establish a set of workplace guidelines, which we then implemented into these new workplaces over a period of time to get to the point now where we've realised those ambitions.
And I think, Andrew, what's really important about that process is the holistic nature of those original questions that you asked yourselves as an organisation. So, to your point, Zoe, it's easy to just sign up another lease and get yourself another office the same as you used to have. But if you really start asking yourself, what kind of organisation holistically do we want to be in the future? And as you said, Andrew, building on both the strengths that you've already got, but also identifying things that you want to change, then really your workplace as an embodiment of that idea and that future culture should be a key enabler to making that reality, because your workplace is such a pervasive enabler and communicator of that idea that it can give you a big head start to becoming that organisation into the future by making it easy to do things that are aligned with that future culture and making it harder to do things that are misaligned or working against you.
Mm. And what's interesting is how that manifests itself in the actual spaces. Was a very significant shift in the use of space. And I remember some diagrams that the Hassel team put together, looking at how much in our old offices, how much was normal workspace, if you like, where all the desks are, if you like. How much is circulation, how much is meeting space, and how much is collaboration space, and so on. And what the new offices have is a very different mix. So the primary work areas are a lot smaller, but the total area usage on a per person basis is about the same. And what we've been able to do by sort of condensing, intensifying the primary work areas and going to a mobile or agile working is to create all these other places for whether it be for collaboration or research or quiet working, all this rich variety of different spaces that that enable people to choose where they work and work in the very best way at any one time. So that's for me probably the biggest shift that we've seen.
So giving people a bit of choice.
Yeah, you're giving people more choice, but I was also going to say that the reason that that's the right strategic move for Arup is because, as Andrew said, the beginning point was, okay, our real strength as an organisation, our strategic strengths or our advantage is the quality of our people at Arup and their expertise, but then the generosity and collegiality and knowledge sharing that's built into their culture. And so the idea of shifting that space allocation is to actually expose that generosity and culture and put it on show and allow it to run, and make it more visible both to one another within Arup, but also, really importantly, making it apparent and visible as an advantage to the outside world. So to Arup's clients and collaborators and potentially talent that might want to come and join the organisation in the future. These are all things that now, when you walk into their new spaces, you can immediately see those cultural attributes all around you in a way that the older, more traditional spaces didn't really reflect very well.
Absolutely, and the brief. I summarise the brief as a workspace that could only be Arup, and it really does sort of capture what we're about as an organisation. Of course, we work in the built environment. Our offices are a showcase for our design, but more so for our collaborative nature and our culture and so on. And it amuses me when you walk into some organisations and they have what they call the client floor. And then, there are other floors that are actually quite different. What does that say about an organisation where they have to sort of dress up a client floor and make you feel better about being in that, and where their people work is something different? At Arup, we're very proud of what we are as an organisation. We put everything on show. When you walk into our office, you feel straight away that you are immersed in this organisation and everything that it stands for. And I think that's good, obviously, for our clients, but I think it also engenders a sense of kind of pride in our staff as well.
And so, Zoe, there were sort of three main ideas, I think, within that from our point of view, because then our team helped Arup to explore that idea and express that as their brief. But then our teams then worked on the design and collaborated with the Arup engineers to actually design the physical spaces in each of the Melbourne, Sydney and Singapore offices. And there were three main ideas, I think, that started to drive those designs from the strategic guidelines that we're talking about. One was this, as Andrew's alluding to, this sort of expanded front of house idea where instead of just a single controlled front of house, you actually make the whole of the office or a much greater portion of the office into an active, collaborative front of house zone where you can actually occupy that space with your clients and partners and where they immediately get exposed to working with Arup just by being in the space with them. So that was one key idea, but the other two are probably also important. I mean, one was to recognise the diversity of the ways in which Arup people collaborated with each other around the office and the different forms that took, and providing a better range of spaces that reflected all those different ways that people were wanting to collaborate with one another, and putting that on show to one another as well. So now, hopefully, as you walk around the offices, you can see a full diversity of, workshopping spaces, whiteboard walls, little huddle meetings, big town hall meetings, one-on-one chats, and all of those other things. Like every version of how people can collaborate should be visible, and you get a sense of all of that collaboration going on in the organisation. So that was the second idea. And probably the third one, which is really important in Arup and most other organisations too, is to make sure that all the diverse teams in the business are just as supported by the workspace as one another. So you're not designing it for one part of the organisation, but you're designing a series of spaces that can be equally well used by all the different parts of the organisation, even though they're really quite different. In Arup's case, you've got people working on very large, very long-running infrastructure engineering projects that go for years at a time, or you've got very short, sharp pieces of quick consulting advice that might only last several hours or several days, and everything in between. So you've really got to be able to work equally well at both ends of that spectrum. So those were the sort of ideas, maybe three key ideas that started to drive what the physical spaces should then be like.
Yeah, just picking up on that last point, we're very much a multidisciplinary business. Lots of businesses are these days, of course, that do lots of things. But for us, the real value that we deliver tends to be where we bring those different things together. There's a nice quote that I like, which says that the value is in the mortar, not just in the bricks. And I very much see that as Arup. So creating a workplace that is agile, but also is highly kind of connected, was really important. And of course, we've done that by creating large voids in our space, and that visual connection, and that sense that we're all part of one organisation, whereas that's very difficult to do where you have discrete floors. As soon as you have discrete floors, they tend to have a subculture. So we work very hard to not do that and make sure that, we work as one joined up organisation.
Yeah, well, I visited the office last week, and so I definitely felt that when I was there, that you could see everyone else on the different floors, and you felt like, it was still, even though if you were on floor, 4 or 5, you could still easily jump on the stairs and go on to the next person. You could even probably shout, but I'm sure the acoustics wouldn't allow for that. But I also felt that there were lots of different rooms and like spaces that, like the small library, for example, or the, I think, acoustic room or sound room. Can you give us some examples of these different things that you've included and why you've included them?
Yeah, sure. So it's probably two things that have driven that. One is what we've been talking about in terms of providing that variety of different work settings for people. So the library you mentioned is a good example. So we have a library, we have lots of books, so we can create a library. But really the point is it's a space for very quiet working. So no phones, no speaking. If you just want to get away and work quietly, then you've got somewhere to go. And then there's a variety of other sort of more collaboration style spaces, design studio spaces, meeting rooms. So there's that variety, but also, we have some really interesting things that we do at Arup around knowledge and research. So one of the interesting ones is Arup University, which is our internal knowledge management research foresight entity that is global, but we have 5 full-time staff in Sydney that are there to support our knowledge management. We put them at the base of the atrium on level 3, and that's very much a focal point. And that's very intentional that they are very visible, because knowledge management is fundamental. And then we also have some sort of technical specialist spaces where we're able to actually simulate. You mentioned the sound lab, for example. I mean, that's a very high-tech, acoustically isolated space that has a 360-degree surround sound system, beyond anything that you would have at home that can allow our clients to experience sound environments, whether it be because we're designing a new concert hall or people are concerned about road noise or rail noise. And so that's a very technical specialist space. And our lighting guys also have a lighting lab, which is actually a meeting room. But what we've done is we've set it up in a way that they can very quickly and easily change the lighting. So new samples, new products come onto the market, they can test them, or they might be doing a mock-up of an area for a client. They can very quickly do that. So we also got makerspace. We're developing an experiential space. So there's a whole variety of rich technical spaces that support what we do as an organisation. And I think it's really important that we have these because I think some engineering firms are just a bunch of people sat behind a computer, and of course we've got a lot of them. But we want our people to really be engaged in the physical doing of and research into those things that we do. So here in Sydney, Melbourne, Singapore, we all have this wide variety of different technical spaces that allow us to push the boundaries of what we do.
Yeah, excellent. Now, how have you improved remote working for people that maybe can't get into or don't come into the office every day?
So we one of the things we decided to do before the move of the 3 big offices was to try and get people working as best they could in this kind of new ways of working. So we implemented full Skype for Business, soft phone style working. We also have people working agile. So everybody has a laptop, nobody has a fixed desk, and so on. The old offices weren't really very well designed for that, but nevertheless, we got people working in that way. So a lot of that, the sort of technology side of things, we had already introduced, and that gives people that opportunity to work, as I said earlier, wherever they think appropriate. So our culture here and the way that we work is that we trust our people to do the right thing by our clients and by us, and work wherever they feel is appropriate, do their best work. That might be at home, ideally if they've got an ergonomic work set up, if they're going to be there for very long. Or they might be working in a cafe or a client's office or a project office or whatever it might be. So the mobile technology, and as I say, driven mainly through Skype for Business, was implemented a few months ago before we moved, and everybody's into that way of working.
Yeah, so obviously you would need a number of policies for that flexibility piece in place. So can you share a bit of light on the policies for flexibility and how you've kind of instilled that in the culture at Arup?
It's really interesting because I couldn't actually tell you what our policies are, and I'm not even really that interested in what they are, if I can put it that way.
Yeah.
Because I think how we treat our people and expectations around how they're going to work is much more of a kind of behavioural and leadership question, really. Now, I think there are some policies around it, as I alluded to earlier. We don't want people working, sat up in bed, in an ergonomically unsound way at home or wherever they might be. So we do have some guidance around, expectations that people will have a decent work set up. I would say probably our policies are catching up. So we still have core working hours, as we describe them, in a 37.5-hour working week, and your core hours are sort of 9 to 4:30, and with half an hour, whatever either side. We're actually looking now at bringing in much more flexible work contracts, and it's something we're going to be piloting in this region, in Australasia region, but Arup are looking at globally, which are around saying, well, look, we employ you to do a notional 37.5-hour work week, but we don't need to tell you when to do that, and we trust you to work those hours and do the right thing by us and by our clients, and actually really freeing it up in terms of how people work. And the other aspect of that then is providing a great deal of flexibility around how people might work with us. So, and this pretty much plays out already. If people want to go to a 4-day working week, or 3.5 days, or a 9-day fortnight, pretty much anything that's reasonable. But as I say, for me, the processes and policies are kind of catching up. But what's really important is how we treat our people and how they treat us. And, the people who work for Arup, they're professional people, they're smart people, they love what they're doing. If anything, it's more about telling them to go home at the end of the day, and not be working too hard.
Yeah, I think instilling that culture, like you said, I think it sounds like, and I'm also aware of this working for Arup, is that, the policies are definitely there, but the culture is there. And that's the most important thing. Working in that high trust, high respect environment is really important. And that's the only way, that flexibility can work. You can have all the policies in the world, but if you don't have that culture there, then it's never going to work well.
And I think that's why these spaces are so important, because like I was saying before, you work, the physical environment is such, makes that culture visible. It makes it apparent to everyone, and you see those behaviours on show around you all the time, and it becomes much easier for people to understand the culture that they're working within.
Yeah, well, that's a good segue to come back to the built form. And how did you incorporate, sustainability into the design and operation of these new buildings?
In both Sydney and Melbourne, we did a deal with the developers, investor here in Sydney and Lendlease down in Melbourne, whereby we were the base building engineer, as well as obviously looking after our own fit out, which is one of the reasons it's taken us this long. But it's allowed us to move into buildings where the base building design is Arup, as well as our fit out design. It did allow us to influence the base building and the fit out from a sustainability point of view. So in Sydney, and I think Melbourne's similar, but in Sydney, we have a 6 Green Star base building, and we also have a 6 Green Star fit out. So we did use the Green Star framework as our guide, and the Green Building Council just about to put out a press release, and one of the things they mentioned is that we got 4 marks for materials, which is pretty unusual. So we looked very hard at what materials we were using, obviously working with Hassel around selection of furniture and finishes and the like. Energy efficiency, indoor air quality was a big one. Here in Sydney, we influenced the base building design to, at least on our floors, to put in an underfloor air conditioning system. And that creates a very high quality internal environment compared to traditional systems. So that was a particular feature here. We have, I forget the number, it's about 900 plants I think we've got in the office. So, that helps. We've got a tree in our university space, which is, possibly a bit symbolic. But, I think it's interesting, isn't it? You design any space, there's all these different things pulling you in different directions, in terms of workplace and sustainability, and obviously working within budgets and so on. But I think it's fair to say that sustainability was always kind of front and centre, and partly because that's our world. That's, we obviously consult into that world, but also, our staff are pretty demanding around, what their expectations are of what Arup would provide. And I think if we didn't have a building that was walking the talk in terms of sustainability, they would question that as well.
I think the other thing on sustainability that is important to talk about, which probably gets overlooked a fair bit, is that one of the most sustainable things you can do is maximize your kind of value from the building that you're occupying. So organizational value per square meter, not just people per square meter, but are you getting maximum value and impact out of the amount of space that you occupy? And I think that's something that's probably less technical and less sort of built fabric in its idea, but organizationally, let's maximize the use of these resources and make sure we're getting full value from them, which I think the Arup workplaces really do.
Now, I've heard that Arup plan to be carbon neutral by 2020. Is that correct?
So in this region, we have committed to 100% renewable energy purchase. In fact, we launched the RE100. I don't know if you saw that, the RE100, which is the 100 organisations globally that are committing to full renewables. The Australasia part of that organisation was launched here. It's part of a commitment that we as an organisation are putting the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals at the heart of our business strategy. Two reasons. One is it's the right thing to do, and the other is that we think that's, future success is that we head in that direction for our business. So yes.
Excellent. Now, what smarts have you incorporated into your into the building, but also the planning and that kind of thing as well?
Yeah, one thing that's probably worth highlighting is our sort of people finding platform. We did a pilot of agile working. In fact, as I mentioned, we ended up with our previous office, the whole office working agile. But when we did the original pilot, and we asked people, what did they like or didn't they like about working this agile way? We asked them 30 questions, and 29 of them were either neutral or positive around agile working. And the one thing that people, was a bugbear for people was that they couldn't find, or they didn't know where to go to find their colleagues if they wanted to have a face-to-face. In the new offices, we've implemented a system that basically knows where everybody is. Well, not entirely where everybody is, but knows where their laptop is. Either through the Wi-Fi or if you're connected directly to the network, the system knows where you are. And there is a touch screen on each of our floors, a large displays touch screen where you can just type in somebody's name and it will bring up where they are in the office, or indeed through your laptop. So it's not entirely innovative. Other organisations have done similar things, but ours very much designed around our space and what we wanted to achieve. So that was a good use of technology to deal with one of the consequences of agile working. Beyond that, I think, we've obviously got the full suite of technology solutions that you'd expect around video conferencing, around the primary work point setup. We have dual monitors on nearly every screen, which seems to be something that our staff are particularly keen on. They're working on technical work. And so from the technology side of things, one of the nice things was that everything pretty much worked when we moved, which I think was a bit of a shock to some of our staff. They were kind of almost half expecting it not to, but everything worked pretty well. So, that layer of technology has to work. It's a given now that if you're going to work in this new agile kind of smart way, the technology has to be right. But that's only one side of the equation. As Steve was alluding to earlier, there's the people side as well, and that interface of how people work in a way that embraces the technology, embraces the way of working within the new workplace, and bringing all of those things all together is what creates success. And I think it's really nice for me to have seen that people have really embraced the way of working in the new office more so than in the old one, because the office provides all those facilities and the technology works and it all makes sense to them.
One of the other challenges is doing that across locations too, right? So more and more an organisation like ours, is a network of people that are moving around across all these different cities, working with clients across different places. And so the technology just doesn't have to just work for the people who are based there, but ideally seamlessly someone from Melbourne can walk into Sydney office and it works just as seamlessly as it does at home every time. So that's an added challenge that's getting more and more important as people's work gets more mobile across different places.
Yeah, absolutely. And some people thought we were a bit mad to move our three largest offices in the region within a month of each other, and it probably was in some ways. But what it did do was allow us to make sure that those things that needed to be the same across the different fit-outs were. So the experience of using a VC room or the desktop setup, for example, is the same wherever you go. And in fact, we had our global CIO over head of IT, I guess you call him. He was talking about what's going on around the Arab world, and he very much sees what we've done here as leading in terms of our use of technology and our approach to workplace. And in some ways, I'm not entirely surprised about that, because I think Australia generally, Steve, you might have a view on this, but Australia generally is pretty progressive around use of workplace and technology and creating these sorts of environments.
Yeah, that's certainly, I think people have observed that over a long time now, and seems to be commonly accepted view that there's something progressive about workplace and workplace designs and the way they support organisations in Australia. And I know that we certainly have clients who come from all around the world to see projects like these, not just because of the design and the smart for the technology, but I think particularly for how they support people and organisational cultures.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, and that's certainly true in the Arab world. London are just about to design the fit out of their next major space, and they're certainly looking at what we've done here in Sydney and Melbourne, Singapore, and looking to learn from us. But the feedback I get is, the biggest challenge isn't the design of the workplace or the technology; it's actually getting people. Now we haven't really talked about that, but that whole change management process of getting people to think about working differently, how you encourage them to do so, then how you get the successful outcomes. Particularly for those people who, it can be a very big change. Typically the older staff. That's a very important part of transition.
But as you said, Andrew, if it's set up right, it helps with that because it makes it intuitive. And that's great design, right? Whether you're talking about industrial design of an object or a piece of equipment or software, the intuitive use of it is something that is an attribute of great design. And the same thing works for all workplace design. Is if it's good, people naturally understand it and how it's intended to be used and start doing it naturally without needing a manual or to be taught how to use it or to go through some sort of rigorous training change process, which is not to say that these things don't represent change for people. They do, of course. But I think if the design is good and integrated, I'm talking holistically, the design of the overall outcome for people, if it's good and integrated, then it makes it easier for people to adapt to that change and work in a new and different way.
Yeah, and we've definitely seen that here. I've been surprised how some of the people that I thought would be really challenged have actually just slipped into the new way of working here. So that I think that really answers or speaks to what you're saying. But part of that is actually making sure that everything they need is provided for. And it's the devil is often in the detail around where do I put my PPE, or how do I access my locker, or you've got to think of all these things. And then if you get 99% of it right, then people will just go with it.
Yeah, I agree. Now, this next question, I might merge these two, but what do you think the emerging trends are that people aren't talking about enough? And I think on the theme of, the way that we're working, what are those emerging trends?
It's interesting. I think it's a great question. And this is something that we spend a lot of time thinking about because, we need to be ahead of these trends and thinking about things before people start talking about them. I think one of the biggest ones is work and organizations getting more and more self-organizing, moving beyond traditional organizational structures and hierarchies and genuinely becoming self-organizing teams. Now, once you take that to a certain extent, it really does change the dynamic in a workplace environment in a way that affects all of the things we've been talking about, the use of space, the use of technology, the cultural cues, and everything that a work environment provides to a core organization has to accommodate that or empower and enable that level of self-organization. So, it's a bit like we sometimes talk about the difference between a set of traffic lights and a roundabout, at an intersection. The old organization uses traffic lights and spatial hierarchies in the workplace to command and control when to go and when to stop and who's going when. Whereas the round, fluid movement of a roundabout means there's some basic set of principles that you're working to, and within that, people look after themselves, do the right thing, and things work actually more smoothly than they do through a traffic light. Same thing in an organisation. So, but that brings some real challenges, I think, particularly around leadership and cultural leadership, because when the rules get less and the guiding principles and cultural principles get more emphasis, then obviously you're leaning on that a lot to lead a very different kind of organisation where you're leading from behind a group of people rather than necessarily leading from the front, if you know what I mean. So I think that's a real challenge, not so much in the immediate term, but if you take that to its full conclusion, that starts to really be quite a challenging thing that I don't think people are really talking about as much as maybe we should be. For example, if you think about that going to the point of the traditional makeup of the organization actually breaking down and becoming, instead of a single organization, an aggregation of independent workers working as freelancers or small boutique niche businesses that come together on a project by project basis.
Yeah.
To the extent that the body of the organization isn't there anymore, but is actually just made up on an as-needed, real, just-in-time basis, that really starts to pose quite a different design challenge for, physical workplace and technology platforms, and even how much space you need, what kind of space, how security works, who's inside, who's outside, et cetera, all really start to need to be thought through again from first principles. And there are lots of organizations or industries that have headed that direction quickly already. If you take the media sector, for example, newspapers, they need vastly less physical real estate than they used to because of the way their workforce has changed. And there's no reason why a large engineering firm like Arup or design firms like Arup and Hassel or other kinds of more traditional firms might not go along the same way. It just means that they will need to come together in a different way in their workplace.
Yeah, look, I think what Steve's been talking about is really interesting, but I just wonder about the capacity of leadership to be able to create organisations like that. But I think you can see the potential in that, but it's just a step beyond. We talk about technologies and enabler, workplace, culture, leadership. Where does that then go? You kind of have to have all those other things, I think, lined up and right, and then say, okay, how do we push this even further? And for Arup, I think that multidisciplinary, bringing people together, project based, approach is where we're heading.
Yeah, excellent.
I think it becomes a conversation about belonging and identity. I think even in that environment, people still want to belong to something. It's just that what that is made up of is changing. So we look, for example, at the co-working sector, so the co-working community, which has grown massively over the last 5 to 10 years or so. We do quite a lot of work in that sector, and I find that really interesting because people who could easily work from home or remotely in their small business are paying economic value to belong to an environment, even though it's not a traditional organisation. There's something in that talks to the value of place, and the value of community, and why people want to come together as part of doing their work, even when they don't have to on an organisational basis. So it's those sort of things, I think, that are going to be interesting over the coming 10 years or so, especially if you then pose yourself a challenge of trying to understand and measure the value of these things. What is the value of a well-designed workplace? I think we should be, in 10 years from now, I'd like to hope we're much better at being able to capture and quantify and measure and analyse the value that great design brings to those kinds of challenges.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think I'm one of those people that has paid for an office in a co-working space. And it's because I, as an extrovert, I like the people. I like being able to go to a different place that isn't my house, and then, I guess I belong to the Arup community, but then I also have this other community where I do my other work. That, you just get ideas that you didn't think that you could even think of, because, people just bring such a different perspective when they're not in the same, background or discipline as you. But then also it's a more relaxed feel as well. So you just kind of get, the different thoughts coming out and different conversations that are happening. So, and I also think that with the younger generation, that's what they'll be looking for. We'll be looking for belonging, purpose, but also that flexibility that we spoke about earlier, being in a high trust, high respect environment. And how do you, as leadership, really, instill that in your culture? Thanks for sharing that, Steve, and thanks for adding that, Andrew, because I think you're right. That structure needs to be there, those foundational pieces of leadership and, having the right things in place and that kind of thing. It can't happen without those. So I think that conversation is quite well-rounded because we've got all the pieces of the pie coming together.
Yeah, and I think the Arup workplace projects are heading in absolutely that direction. That, like you said, you want to be exposed to the most interesting ideas and conversations. And smart organizations like Arup know that they don't have a monopoly on good ideas. There are going to be also good ideas from outside of Arup, from their partners, from their clients, et cetera. So all that front of house space that we talked about and the internal visibility within the office is about making sure Arup's people are exposed to all the interesting stuff that the organisation is touching in its day-to-day work, so that people get both the sense of belonging to the organisation, but also exposure to all the interesting stuff beyond the organisation.
Ultimately, that's where the rubber hits the road. We can sit here and be very proud of our office and our company, but what influence do we make in the world? We talk about shaping a better world, and So one of the things I like about, this place that we've created is that, when our clients come along, they want to come to our office, they want to engage with us. It improves our ability to do what we want to do, which ultimately is influence, better design outcome, better built environment, better cities. And, ultimately it's about providing better service to our clients.
Excellent. Well, it's been so great to chat with you both. I really just have one last question, which is how can people connect with you? Maybe Steve, do you want to go first?
Sure. Well, I'm at Hassel. So our website is Hassel Studios. So that's HASSELL Studio.com. Or email me. So scoster, SCOSTER @hasselstudio.com, or on Twitter at Steve Costa 33. And always interested to meet new people who are talking about these sorts of things, because we've got lots we can still be learning from each other, I think.
Excellent.
So it's Andrew Pettifer, PETTIFER. You can find me on LinkedIn at Andrew Pettifer on Twitter, or andrew.pettifer@arup.com.
Excellent. Well, we'll put all the links in the show notes so people can click away. It's been awesome to chat with you. Thanks so much for coming on to the Smart Community Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
Excellent. Talk soon. Thanks so much for listening to the Smart Community Podcast. Show notes for this episode and all other episodes are available on our website, mysmart.community. If you have any questions for us or any of our guests, you can email hello@mysmart.community or find us on the socials. We are on LinkedIn, Facebook and Twitter @SmartCommPod. That's comm with 2 M's. If you are enjoying the podcast, please leave us a rating and review at wherever you listen. This really helps us reach more ears, so thank you in advance. As always, I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed making it.
The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.